Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's absolutely wonderful to be here. And thank you very much for that lovely introduction. This afternoon, I'd like to share with you some thoughts about branding that might expand your thoughts with regard to it and how it potentially could be of benefit to you in your businesses and organizations. But this afternoon, there's probably a few of you who are also wondering how this is really terribly relevant to your core remit, or how it's going to add value or give you another element to your arsenal in terms of protecting your organizations. This is really going to be introducing the thoughts that it is actually a critical part of what you do, but maybe it's been overlooked or not given sufficient attention in terms of some of the considerations. Branding actually fundamentally underpins a huge amount of what you do, but is not typically often part of your everyday remit, and it's really just the softer part maybe of the marketing side of the business. The reason why, have you ever thought about why we actually build brands? Fundamentally, we build brands in order to make our offering, the preferred choice with our target audience. That's the fundamental reason. Step out of the cyberspace for a moment and think of something really humdrum, like having to do your weekly shop. And just imagine pushing that trolley down the supermarket aisle and everything is packaged in black and white containers. There's no other discernible point of difference on the packaging. Think how much of a chore it would be. You've got to choose your milk and you're not sure whether you want low fat, fortified, or full fat, and it's just very small detail on the descriptor. Now think about that for every item of just your basic commodities that you are trying to purchase and how much longer it would take you to do your shopping. Branding is all about expediting and influencing choice. So within your businesses, you all have core target audiences that you want to resonate and engage with. And your brand is actually the tool in order to do that most effectively. It's also the element that you use to create distinction, difference, and memorability, to make your offering referable to those who are relevant in your market. Think about it in terms of when you have a really powerful brand, you can actually leverage new product introductions of it. Look at something as basic as, take it 20 years ago and we just had Mars bars, and now we have Mars ice cream. At its most basic level, those are two products that typically have seasonal preferences. That's leveled out the business, because chocolate consumption drops in the warm months, and ice cream obviously picks up in the warm months, and vice versa when it's off-season in the winter. Or even if you take Apple and look at the amount of different products there compared to when Apple first started across different sectors. So when you have a powerful brand, you can leverage multiple different new product offerings, but they always have to be relevant to your core target audience. And of course, if you have a powerful brand, it in itself becomes a very valuable piece of intellectual property. So those are all some of the mix of the reasons of why we actually build brands. This might be another pertinent reason to actually reflect on the value of this in terms of the relevance of your brand. Recent survey, Gallup survey, 80% of Fortune 500 company CEOs regard their brand as their #1 asset. So in terms of your actual overall risk management strategy, brand risk management then, this would suggest is a very valid part of what you need to consider. This is part of the same survey from Gallup, and maybe this would just give you something to think about. They screened a number of different industries and categories, from consumer goods down to hospitality and hotel. Now, unsurprisingly, the key question they asked when they were researching the different industry sectors is, do you know what your brand stands for and what differs you from the competition? The best performing category in industry sectors is actually consumer goods, which isn't a huge surprise. We drop down, and then at around about 50%, we have travel, transportation. But in the lower quartile, we have IT, technology, finance. I think that actually is quite a salient point to reflect on when you're in the business of winning, holding on to customers and maintaining their confidence and trust in terms of everything you have to offer. Because fundamentally, security is about trust, but branding is also very much about trust and building relationships with your relevant audience. That survey then also went on to ask the same question of different individuals within an organization, from the director level through to middle management through to general employees. What is also a concern here? This was regardless of sector. The same question asked of senior management, 60% could actually, in very simple terms, articulate what their brand promise is, what they stood for, and what made them different from the competition. Worryingly, middle management, it was around about 50%, and then mainstream employees less than 40%. In fact, 9% couldn't articulate what their business offering was at all in terms of what they stood for and what made them different to the competition. And don't forget, a significant part of that representation is customer-facing staff. They're engaging with your core target audience every day. The people in your business are actually an extension of your brand. Look at the missed opportunity there. If your team, your colleagues can't articulate very effectively, but very simply in one sentence, what it is you stand for and what makes you different. Think of it in terms of, put it in really basic terms, money left on the table. Or in other terms, if you're trying to protect something in your business, how can you protect something you don't fully understand from a branding perspective? When I put this logo up in front of any of the workshops we run or training sessions, whether it's with senior management or general staff with regard to programs in terms of on branding and understanding their brand, Apple is always divides the room in terms of as much for those who love it as those who don't. Can I have a quick show of hands who actually has engaged with an Apple product? Has engaged with an Apple product. And out of those, would you regard yourself as liking the product? Okay, so that's a reasonable representation, and it's in around about slightly over. That's actually reasonably typical when I actually ask that question. You all know the story of Apple. Its founding, Steve Jobs leaving the company temporarily, then the company nearly folds, he comes back, and the rest is history. The really salient point here, in terms of considering a lot of the space in terms of which you operate, is that fundamentally, Apple is an IT, tech, software, hardware organization. But nothing they do is driven from that perspective. It's a very marketing, branding-focused organization. They put customers at the very heart of everything they do. Everything that they do in terms of how they engage, build their products. If you were going to describe what Apple stands for, it's all about humanizing technology. So when you reflect on your own brands, can you say in very simple terms what your own brand stands for? Let me give you another example. Disney stands for magic and happy memories. Let's take it into the service sector, and FedEx stands for whatever it takes to get your delivery there on time. Things like we're a leading edge, premier solution is actually fairly meaningless. It doesn't actually offer anything that is understandable in terms of offering, because it can be so easy in any industry. Let's take a look at the facts of Apple. Most of these facts you're very familiar with. Apple actually doesn't put as much R&D into its offering compared to other brands in the marketplace. In fact, when you consider the profitability, the most valuable company in the world, they only actually put in about 2%. If you were to look at the companies in the top 20 in terms of R&D. They're actually only 18th. Microsoft is at the top. They also have over 60% of the profits in the mobile sector. That makes up a significant proportion of their general earnings. And yet they only have 3 mobile phone products. Compare that with their nearest, I guess, most significant competitor in terms of recently how things did in the marketplace. Samsung has, I think, thereabouts 23. Bring that back to the practical terms of managing that from just production line issues, logistics, all of those things, and then just the marketing budget that's got to go into individually marketing each one of those different product offerings. You can then understand why they have so much spare cash sitting there. But think about this a little bit further. They're in the tech space, but consumers don't really think of them as that. They're all about making technology really accessible to everybody, to people who've probably had minimal engagement with anything that's tech-related. I mean, Steve Jobs, you think about him, he was a phenomenal, highly skilled presenter. Who else in the tech space could get away with referring to buttons being so gorgeous on a device they were lickable? I mean, nobody could. But he knows that that resonates. He knew that resonated with his target audience in a way that was relevant to them, because he was a highly skilled presenter. Or describing the product in terms of using and handling it as being a magical experience. It's not typical of the space in which the products, the industry. Which means but he knows, Apple as a brand really knows their audience very, very well in terms of how they engage with them. And then if you look at their marketing strategy, they very much control the chain in terms of where the brand is experienced. If you take the Apple stores, which when they first started opening them, general opinion was it was a big mistake, but look at the success. In London alone, those Apple stores earn more per square foot than any other retail store in London. And then bring it back again to looking at, I mean, wouldn't you like to have a piece of that where you have customers who are such zealots about what you have to offer that they are prepared to queue up a few nights beforehand to give you their money because they want to buy your new product? And it happens repeatedly. This is not just a one-off. The recent iPhone 5, similar thing. And then when they arrive in store, think of the culture of the brand, the way in which it expresses itself. They're applauded. So psychologically, they're reaffirmed in terms of they made the right decision to go and buy the next product offering. And really, there isn't a huge, vast difference between version 5 and 4. But they still manage to have this level of zealot brand championing from their customer base. And that, of course, is why they're the most valuable business in the world at the moment. And this is another reason why they put everything they do at the heart of their customers. You might be still wondering why this is relevant to you, but I would ask the question, how well do you really know your customers in its most simplistic sense of their needs, wants, loves, hates, and aspirations? Because the more thoroughly you understand their needs, the more you can actually build a solid brand risk management strategy to protect your business. Because you know then, in terms of the relationship you've cultivated over time, and you've gradually built and deepened, you know then how you're going to manage that relationship more effectively when the proverbial hits the fan. Think about it in terms of just friends in your life, in terms of friends that you class as really good close friends. They put up with you on a bad day. Those friends that are kind of looser associates. If you invest more time in that friendship, you give it more effort, People will tolerate you on your off-color days. In its most simplistic sense, apply the same psychology to then in your own thinking with regard to how your brand engages in the external market. It's all about how solid you can make that relationship. And branding isn't about one big thing. It's about all the small cumulative things you do over time to make that relationship stronger and more robust. Equally, if you neglect it, or if you have, don't forget I mentioned to you, staff are an extension of your brand. If you have staff that are behaving inappropriately or communicating to you in a way that information that shouldn't be relevant to you as a customer, they're actually seriously undermining the brand. So if you bring it back to that Gallup survey and you have a large proportion of your staff who don't completely understand your offering, that actually compromises your brand, particularly if you come in under pressure. If you have a problem in the marketplace, because they're your frontline communication team who are going to take the onslaught in the marketplace, whether they're engaging face-to-face or whether they're an extension of the team through social media or through other forums or blogs or your telecentre.
Hello, I'm a Mac.
And I'm a PC. Hey, Mac, did you hear the good news? Windows 7 is out, and it's not going to have any of the problems my last operating system had. Trust me.
I feel like I've heard this before, PC.
What? Windows Vista's here, and it's not going to have any of the problems that Windows XP had. It's not going to have any of the problems that Windows ME had. It's not going to have any of the problems that Windows 98 had. It's not going to have any of the problems Windows 95 had. It's not going to have any of the problems Windows 2 had. Trust me. This time it's going to be different. Trust me.
Now, you're all very familiar with these. These ads, when they first came out, yeah, they were a little bit provocative, but they very much nailed it in whom their relevant target audience was. And they started around 2006, and they ran a series of them of about 24 different ones up until about 2010. But it was very clear to the audience of whom it was relevant in terms of what the message was being given to them, in terms of who it's targeted at and why the brand is attractive to them. Which means it's just another layer of building a very robust relationship with your target audience in terms of communicating what your offering is all about. Because in order to be able to protect your brand, you actually have to have a very clear understanding of what it's all about. Now let's take a little look at where their advertising sits today.
Read it. Tweet it. Be surprised. Be productive. Make a sale. Make some lunch. Make it movie night. Play a game or an old favorite. Do it all more beautifully with the Retina display on iPad.
You can see how their advertising has evolved. But everything in that presentation is all about how it enhances the target audience lives. It's nothing about how much data it stores or the functional technological aspects of it. It's all about how it humanizes and enhances everyday living experience across multiple different ways. Let me just give you an example of how the core target audience here is typically younger. But if I take my own father, late 70s, he decided end of last year that he wanted to stay in touch with what's happening and technology-wise, and he didn't start using a computer till after he was retired. And he decided he wanted an iPad, which he was duly given for Christmas. Then all the books he was also given, he then said, I've now started reading on an iPad. I don't want to be given any more books. And he gave his books away to all his friends who are not yet on anything digital. My father-in-law, incidentally, he's not living in Ireland, so he wasn't influenced by my father. He went and bought one this year. They're retired, but because of the way they have been impacted with the advertising, they felt it was the barriers of potentially encouraging them to purchase had been removed because the technology was made to appear so approachable and easy and enhancing of their lives. And they're in the minority of the purchasing group within whom Apple targets. Apple really understands their audience, so it can really control the environment in which the product is experienced, engaged, sold. The question then is, how well do you understand your own brand offering in terms of your audience? How are you controlling and managing all the different ways in which your customer base interacts with you? How are you actually making sure that your staff really understands your offering and can reaffirm that consistently in all the experiences and interactions they have in the marketplace, representing your organization? So I think it would be fair to say you could all agree with this, particularly when you look at Apple, or even some of the other really strong, powerful brands in the marketplace, that strong brands fundamentally are far more profitable. Now, you are at a cyber threat conference. Some of you might be wondering where this fits in here, but stick with me. Can I have a quick show of hands here who's an uncle or an aunt? Okay, that's a reasonable representation. The rest of you can sort of like drag back your memories to when you were a lot younger, or you might still have that teddy bear stored at the end of the bed. Have you ever thought why a child forms an attachment to a teddy bear? In the absence of the parents, the teddy bear represents comfort and security. So at a very young age, the child is already bequeathing that inanimate object with meaning. Bring that on a little later in life. Now, for some of you, this image potentially represents a loss of freedom, ball and chain, life is over as you know it. On the other hand, for some of you, it represents love, commitment, longevity, all those warm, fuzzy feelings. And then, of course, there's also in the middle, maybe, it's a whopping great big bruise to your wallet. Either way, this is a piece of metal with a stone in it that we have bequeathed with very significant meaning. Or even if you take these two cars, they're both actually high-value purchase items, albeit in very different target audiences. So, for some of you who might have or aspire to owning a Mini, it represents its cool or nostalgia, it's a great little city car, easy to park. And for anybody who drives a Mini, maybe the Merc represents something that's a little bit big and ostentatious and maybe a bit more costly to run. On the other hand, for your Merc driver, owner, or aspiring, it represents status. You've arrived. You wouldn't like to be seen with less. It reflects on how you feel about yourself. Now, you might be wondering where this is all going. Come back to Apple and Acer. They produce, arguably, similar types of products. But thereafter, that's where the difference stops, or the similarities stop. Because in terms of how they sit in people's minds, what the brands stand for, what they mean to the recipients or their target audiences are very different. So fundamentally, branding is all about giving products, services, experiences, meaning. And we're actually hardwired from a very young age to give products and services meaning. So everything you do within your organizations, whether you realize it or have consciously given it serious, actually is about giving that product or service meaning, that's target audience. Because most of us have outgrown the teddy bear experiences at a certain stage in our lives. And there are lots of other things during different stages of our lives that have significant meaning to. So we also become customers of different brands at different stages. And people who are businesses and organizations who are custodians and managers and owners of brands actually understand that in terms of how their audience is changing. Apple's just been very successful at expanding that reach in terms of its customer base and its age profile. Let's have a quick look at the different aspects that make up a successful brand. Perhaps if you stop for a moment and think about a brand as being almost like a standalone human entity. Because a brand, when you experience it, you do so in all the different ways represented here. If you think of your brand person in terms of how it behaves and how it engages, how that brand either works or doesn't work in the context of how it supports and drives the profitability of your businesses, and also how it helps build your brand strategy, risk management. Because fundamentally, your brand sits in the middle between your business and your customers. And the strength of your brand is actually what underpins a huge amount of the profitability of your enterprise, because your customers don't actually interact necessarily with every individual within the business, but your individuals within the business contribute to the whole brand experience, and that's who your customers engage with in terms of what your brand stands for, the promise, how it expresses itself, which all comes into building relationships. And the more your relationship is, the more you understand your audience, the more you can build a robust strategy that's going to carry you through the more difficult times as well as the good times. You could see from some of the brands I've mentioned, they have a very clear understanding of who their target audience is, what's relevant, what matters to them, and how they're going to engage with them in a way that meets their needs. And I already mentioned this to you, that it is like a living entity when you think about it as almost like a human entity, because it's what you continue to do, all the little things you add to that experience, all the little things you do that is relevant to the brand, that enhances how it's perceived in the marketplace. Because branding is also all about perception. So if you add lots of little things that are positive experiences that endorse and reaffirm to your target audience why they've chosen you as a good thing, you're building on the strength of the brand. Equally, if you neglect it, you're undermining it. And all those little things add up to the point where you lose a customer. I would say to you, if you haven't looked at it maybe in quite these terms, then now is a very good time to. Or maybe to have, go back and have a chat with those who are responsible for managing your brand within your organizations, because it's actually a really important part of your overall risk management strategy. If your teams, if your management team, if your general staff are not actually fully up to speed on everything to do with your brand, what it stands for, what you're going to follow through on and deliver, you leave them in a very weak place when it comes to actually protecting your brand, because they're not sufficiently informed to represent your needs best. And think about it, any of us under pressure, whether it's in our personal lives or our professional lives, we actually become compromised when we're under pressure in terms of making the right decisions. And Andy alluded to this earlier today. You need to have your strategies well considered and thought through, even rehearsed, and even potentially role-played with a certain level of staffing who are going to be dealing with issues and challenges when the proverbial happens. Because undoubtedly at some stage, if you haven't done already, you are potentially going to experience challenges. It's the nature of the business. All of us. You want to make sure you can really deal with those problems when they arise. It needs to be a key part of your planning. And we do run programs with our staff, which is with client staff, and then in terms of trying to enhance their understanding, because we know that in the marketplace, they are the representation, the extension of the brand. And it covers everything from understanding branding in general, such as I'm giving you a very brief introduction to today, to understanding their own brand and how they can leverage that most effectively in the marketplace. I'm going to take you through now a few different examples of where brands have been put under pressure for different reasons. One probably most of you are very familiar with. In fact, who's a customer, whether it's family or friend, or who actually is a customer. So yeah, just about a third of you. So you all have first-hand experience of what it's been like this summer trying to resolve the challenges there. These facts then for most of you are pretty familiar. The biggest issue here though that maybe needs reflection is, did they actually handle this from a branding perspective as effectively as they could have done? Or did they undermine the brand because they weren't handling their communications as effectively? Did they look like they hadn't maybe thought it through as clearly as they should have done? Or was that brand risk management strategy as robust as it should have been? Because arguably the brand has taken a serious knocking in terms of perception, in terms of trust, in terms of how many customers they may or may not have lost. It all raises questions for consideration. And probably quite a few of you might be customers of RSA. I mean, this is the ultimate living nightmare for a security company to be now listed in the top 10 most compromised brands with regard to security issues. That's not a great accolade to have attached to your brand name, where you've actually become a case study in how not to do things. Now, arguably, it actually wasn't necessarily as bad as it could have been, because apart from Lockheed Martin, to the best of our knowledge, there aren't any other significant clients or customers who were seriously compromised. And they dealt with the situation in terms of reducing the risk factor. But the remaining issue is that, did they handle it well enough in terms of how the brand was perceived in the marketplace? And are there still niggling doubts with regard to trust, because that trust was broken? Now, I know, like you do, that when it comes to security, you can only actually reveal a certain amount of information. You're in the business of protecting your client's security, so you're limited in how much you can actually discuss or communicate to the open market. But do you think, potentially now when you look at this in the context of some of what I've shared with you, that they could have potentially handled it a little bit more differently to protect their brand interests? And poor old Sony, well, there's repeated issues there. Who here is a Sony customer, or who knows one, or who has been on the receiving end? Can I have a quick show of hands there? Oh, that's actually not too many of you. Okay. But we'll look at, I mean, as a customer, you couldn't even access your account online because the whole service had to be pulled offline, so you don't even know whether your own personal information was compromised. And then they've been under repeated attack. So that brand has taken one hell of a wallop. And could they have managed that from a brand perception point of view in terms of how they communicated in the marketplace? Because they have had repeated issues arising. It's not just a once-off. And this is an older example. And up until more recently had the unfortunate accolade of being the worst consumer breach in terms of security and loss of information. The difference, though, between TJ Maxx and the other ones is that they actually managed to mitigate some of the damage to their brand reputation a little bit more effectively than the others, because they actually made more of an effort to engage with their audience and to try and do the things that would heal some of the damage, some of the things that really mattered to their audience. Because you're talking, this is a customer base here, a consumer base. The things that on a very practical level compromised people's everyday lives. So that helped rebuild their reputation more quickly and recover some of the compromised trust factor. And of course, it also instigated some legislative change in the US as well. So I think you could potentially agree that with some of the information I've shared with you, that your brand actually very much stands for your relationship between your business and your customers. And it's really, really important you understand that and you nurture it. Because if you don't look after that relationship, treasure it, nurture it, you do have an even more significant potential issue with regard to your brand when it's under threat. So I'm just going to give you here a few quick tips to finish off. Social media, as Andy already touched on, is an unavoidable aspect of all your operations to different and varying degrees and across different platforms. It needs to be absolutely a key part of your brand risk management strategy. You can't ignore it. You absolutely have to engage with it. It's a very much a part of our lives, and it's not going to go away. Yes, your legal team is a hugely important part, and they're critical in terms of the advice and support given. But it's also very important that you don't engage too strongly initially, because that can also backfire. And whether you like it or not, in the public forums you will be tried and judged in amongst your target market in terms of opinion, and people can get incredibly vocal and not necessarily very positively. If anybody would like a copy of our brand risk management guide and you have an Irish phone, you can text brand followed by your name to 51777, and anybody who's from overseas, you can text brand followed by your name to the number underneath, plus 003538764500489. So please, take another look at how your brand risk management strategy sits within your overall risk management policy. And does it address some of the items I've mentioned to you this afternoon? Thank you very much.